I stood by the window, looking over the city. The streets were packed with people rushing, cars honking, and the noise of the world carrying on like it always does. But in that moment, I felt completely still. All I could think about was food. Not just any food, but something that could take me back home. KBL, Kajos, Baboy, and Langka. It's a traditional Filipino dish I grew up with, something I haven't had in years. The pork, the pigeon beans, the jackfruit. Everything about it felt comforting, like a hug in a bowl. And right then, I was craving it badly. The only problem, finding the ingredients was never easy. Langka especially. It's not the kind of thing you see every day in the city. But today, I was determined. I had to find it. I dropped my wife off at work, and with her gone, I thought I'd have the day to run errands and maybe grab something quick to eat. As I pulled into the drive-thru of Tim Hortons, I found myself debating. It was just going to be easier, right? A breakfast sandwich, a coffee, and call it a day. But then, something stopped me. I couldn't shake the thought of KBL, the flavors, the rich, smoky pork, the tender jackfruit. It felt like a craving I couldn't ignore. I took a deep breath, glanced at the menu, and then, against my better judgment, I pulled away from the drive-thru and headed to the supermarket. This was going to happen. No turning back. I parked outside Ocean's Asian Supermarket, a place I knew well. Hey, currently we're in Ocean's Supermarket here in Mississauga. It's one of the Asian stores here in the city, and I'm wondering if they have the ingredients for our cravings for today. Come, let's check it out. It was my usual stop for any Filipino ingredients. No matter how hard to find, I pushed open the door, and the familiar smells of spices and fresh produce greeted me. I didn't have time to waste. I needed to find everything quickly. I headed straight to the meat section. I was looking for pork hocks, meaty, fatty cuts that would make the broth rich and flavorful. I found a selection of them, tucked away in the cooler. The cuts were perfect. I grabbed a pack and satisfied. One down, I muttered under my breath before pushing my cart toward the next section. Next, it was time to find the langka, the fresh jackfruit. I walked down the produce aisle, scanning the shelves. I saw papayas, bananas, and some familiar tropical fruits, but no sign of jackfruit. My heart sank a little. It's never easy finding fresh langka here, especially in the off-season. I kept looking, my hope fading with each empty shelf. But then, in the back corner, I saw it, a small pile of jackfruit, partially hidden behind some other fruits. My hands reached it, almost instinctively, but it wasn't the biggest or the ripest. I could feel the tension leave my body as I placed the langka into my cart. One more ingredient found. With the langka in my cart, I felt a little more hopeful, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. The hardest ingredient to find, I knew, would be the kajos beans. I'd been to this supermarket countless times and never seen them. I walked over to the bean aisle and started scanning the shelves, hoping for a miracle. Black beans, mung beans, pinto beans, but nothing that resembled the kajos beans I needed. I ran my hand through the rows of bags, starting to feel that familiar frustration. I had to have those beans. I took out my phone quickly, searching Kajos beans online. The search results pop up almost immediately. Pigeon beans. That's what they were called in English. It made sense, but I had never seen them labeled that way before. I stood there for a moment processing it, and then as if fate had stepped in, I spotted a bag labeled Congo pigeon beans. They weren't exactly Kajos beans, but they were close enough. I grabbed the bag and tossed it in my cart with a small sigh of relief. That was one obstacle down. I was so close now, but there was still one more piece of the puzzle: the souring agent. Back home, we'd use batuan, a sour fruit that gives the dish its signature tang. But I knew there was nothing like batuan here. I stood in the produce section thinking hard, what could replace it? I scanned the fruits: limes, too mild; tamarind, too sweet. Then my eyes landed on a small bag of fresh cranberries. Tart, sour. Could it work? It wasn't a perfect substitute, but it was worth a try. I grabbed the bag and put it in my cart. At this point, I wasn't going to second guess myself. I was making the dish no matter what. Back home, I laid all the ingredients out in the corner: the pork hocks, the jackfruit, the pigeon beans, and the cranberries. I couldn't help but smile. The whole process had been a challenge, but now I was finally here. I started by broiling the pork hocks to get the smoky charred flavor that would bring the dish to life. The kitchen filled with the familiar smell of sizzling meat, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. As the pork cooked, I chopped the onions, garlic, and cranberries. They called it aromatics. Once the pork was broiled to perfection, I tossed it into the pot with the aromatics. I added water and let everything simmer together before adding the pigeon beans, watching them soften as they absorbed the flavors. 10 minutes later, I threw in the langka. It started to break down, releasing its sweetness into the broth. The smell of everything simmering together made my stomach growl into anticipation. Finally, I added the greens and let the wilt into the broth. The dish was coming perfectly together. The KBL was so perfect, the rich broth gleaming in the light. The pork was tender, the langka soft, and the beans had soaked up all the flavors. The moment of truth had arrived. I took a bite. It was everything I'd hoped for.
Good.